for the Economic Development Committee meeting, 16th of February. Call for apologies. I have one from Councillor Cogan and one from Francois. Are there any other apologies? So I'd like to move that the apologies be accepted. Councillor Hart, Peter Cuff. All those in favour? Aye. Thank you. The register of interest is here. For those that are not familiar with it, if we're going to discuss something that you have a potentially the opportunity to make a few bucks out of, got to put it in. Very important. Preferably not get involved. Thank you. Urgent items not on the agenda. Are there any? Okay. I move to the meetings of the minutes of the last meeting, which was on the 29th of October. Now, the minutes have been put up on team systems. Everyone's had a chance to have a look at them. But no feedback that there are any adjustments that need to be made. Are there any adjustments? Okay. Would someone like to move that the minutes of the Economic Development Committee meeting of the 29th of October 2020 be approved as a true and correct record? I will move it. Councillor Davidson, thank you. Joe Booney, thank you. Those in favour? Aye. Next item on the agenda is the action list. Chair's statement. Okay, I approve that my digital signature be added to the confirmed Economic Development Committee meeting minutes of the 29th of October 2020. Thank you. Move on to action 5, agenda item 5, which is the action list, and Chief Executive.
Thank you, Your Worship. Good afternoon, councillors and guests. So there's only 2 active action items on the Economic Development Committee action list. One is a discussion with Development West Coast in regards to resilience to the region. This has actually been taken up through McDem or Claire Brown and myself, and the Lifelines group have met to discuss this. We've actually provisionally drafted a list of potential projects across the West Coast, covering everything from transport to communications to power, etc. of what would be required to improve resilience across the West Coast. This is still in draft form. It's not ready to present back to any forum at the moment. It's sitting with Claire Brown to put into some sort of business case and take it to the Lifelines group. So I'll bring that back to this committee and future agendas. The second one is a visit to the Hokitika Airport. This was to do with, I suppose, visualising the master plan work that the airport had put together. The suggestion was to wait till the building had been confirmed, the building extension would be confirmed, and we'll get that organised once that tender has been let, and get a visual of what they're proposing to do. Any questions, Your Worship?
Councillors, any questions on the matters raised? Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thanks for the report, Simon. A question in relation to the Hokitika Airport, the site visit. Where is that tender at?
I'm not privy to exactly the date they're announcing it, but I believe it's imminent. It's not already been there.
Joe, can you add to that? Joanne, is it possible to add to that?
Sorry, no, I can't give you an exact date, but it is imminent. You know, it's any day that will be announced, and they'll be up there getting started.
Is any day this month, or is any day in the next 3 months? Or
I'd like to think this month. It certainly won't be 3 months.
Any other questions? Someone like to move that the action list be received? Councillor Hart, thank you. And second. Councillor Martin, those in favour?
Aye.
Thank you.
And we should, just before we move on from the action list, I know we've got a presentation. I think it would be really helpful from an economic development committee perspective to know where those, we're going to hear from Warren too about PG, but where those projects sit. I appreciate council as a mechanism internally with capital projects and tenders, but from this group's perspective, from an economic development perspective, it would be great to have as part of the action list. So I think, like, okay, the airport extension, and what's the update? We meet three, 4 times a year, so we can, they don't have to be onerous updates, but so we're on top of them. There's significant projects that potentially intended to create economic development. So it'd be good to have our finger on the pulse of them, I think. If they could be captured as part of the action list, I think that would be great.
So council should be happy for us to add in the action list from here on an update on Spade Ready and PGF projects.
Yeah, that's fine.
With that,
We could use the catalyst of the PGF update as an update because that's primarily what Warren will be presenting anyway. So we'll just see how that how his presentation plans out, and if there's any gaps in there, we'll make sure it's full next time.
okay, so we'll put it on the action list. That way it'll come up, and if it's through, we can remove it.
Yep.
Quite happy with that?
Yep.
Well, it's with great pleasure I introduce you to Alan Giles. Alan is Westland Kart Club representative. Alan, could you stand up front here? And before Alan starts, I wonder if we could go around the table and introduce yourself to Alan. You may know your has been around longer than Alan.
Yeah, hi, my name's Paul Davidson. I'm the councillor in the Hokitika ward.
Yeah, Peter Cup, I'm a chartered accountant and chairman of Westbrook's.
Joanne Madden, executive assistant.
Had the pleasure of meeting you several times.
Yep. Simon Bassett, chief executive of Western District Council.
Lathan Martin, councillor.
Anna Hart, councillor.
Management.
Jo Burney, economic development manager, DWC.
And the thread on the back desks there, and front desks. Of course, and Joe. Leslie. That's Leslie Crime.
Sorry. Yeah, Leslie Crime, group manager, corporate services.
Louis Sparks, group manager, district assets. My name's Chris Burgess, I'm a consultant here at presentations.
Well, first of all, very good to meet you all. We're just going to get them all here because TC is just quietly sitting there saying nothing.
Te Aroha Cook, Group Manager, Regulatory and Community Services.
And the last one's Joanne.
Yeah, Joanne Conroy, I'm the chair of Westland Holdings and an appointed member of the committee.
Thank you very much, Alan.
First of all, it's a pleasure to be here, I think. I feel a little bit nervous. I'm quite deaf and struggle with some of the names and bits and pieces as well, and I do forget people's names very rapidly, but anyway, I believe I'm here to maybe sell an idea or a concept. And it's been one that's been ongoing for quite some time, probably over 3 or 4 years with Bruce, different times bumped into him. Mainly the Christmas parades, etc. And recently I'm heavily involved in the motorcycle street race in Greymouth. And long time life member of the Western Kart Club. So karts are my passion. Been doing it a long time, over 40 years myself. And whilst we do take part in a street demonstration in Greymouth at the motorcycle street race, the idea has been floated to run a dedicated kart meeting. There's been a wee bit of a change of heart in our hierarchy at kart sport level, because the answer has always been pretty much categorically no for the last number of years, really. Most clubs are scared to run an event. I mean, there's no doubt about that, and WorkSafe has certainly taken care of that. And indeed, my experience with the unfortunate death of motorcyclists in Greymouth motorcycle street race also really brings that home. However, to that end, I have had cars full of people come down, and some of you may have seen them around town just after Christmas, and we walked a bit of a circuit that we've sort of been working on, and been taken back to our national steward, and the answer is very much a maybe. So that's a big step forward, I can tell you right now. So initially, I suppose, where do we go from here? Really, as well, support from the local community is paramount to an event to take place. I can talk you through a little bit about what I would like to see happen, or where we thought that circuit might be. And it's pretty simple. I didn't print out stuff, but I've got some wine glasses on too. But most of you all obviously know your own area here, which is Gibson Quay, Cyril Street, around the corner onto Hamlin Street, again onto Tankard Street, right turn onto Camp, and then through Wharf back down to the quay. So on that little circuit, I'm just over here, which is sort of out of the town but in town. You do have some wonderful streets, and I can tell you that would be probably smoother and better, but again, are highly residential, and whereas this area is still relatively commercial. And I realise being commercial, the business is taken into consideration. I've already taken the liberty of talking to Brett Smith as well from Waterkeem, which is the new building going up. And at this stage, initially, it would be quite supportive for the event. They may well consider obviously having it closed for the day. I do notice there's another development going on just recently. My last few visits take a ticket in that area. It would be classed as a street sprint. So the speeds won't be ginormous, and we're also looking at keeping it that way to enable us to bring the younger classes, the juniors, which start at 7 years old. So we hope to bring the smaller carts into play. We have a huge hierarchy and stuff from the car sport that's a minefield, and it's very, very early days. But I suppose really it's just to find out how you guys feel about it. We get the support as well, and take it from there. Really, it's a big commitment. The date's been suggested already from car sport official. Like maybe we look at not the exact date, but early January next year. So. Originally, I was hoping to get it done this summer, but it was just not really going to happen. As you can appreciate, there'll be a full working committee, etc., etc. Our own club has 20 members, and it varies on a race day, on a club day, from 8 to 15 in attendance at various times. The street demonstration in Greymouth, we managed to aspire only seniors, the street demo, so we don't have any juniors for that. We field about as little as 8 and as many as 15 carts at that demonstration. The speeds of Greymouth are far greater than what we'll be able to achieve on this particular circuit. So there's some things there. And the other thing is that car sport now are not happy with often just tyre sub barriers. They want proper Amco style barriers, or the plastic barriers that we have in place more. Also, having been on the Motorcycle Street Race Committee a good number of years, although I have resigned from that position, have an undertaking that we would go and borrow or use fencing, etc., from that event can be brought down to here to help set up. So I do believe Bruce has almost volunteered the Rotary to help us with the setup, etc., bits and pieces like those, and a general comment. So the benefits for this community, I would expect there to be, I would be very disappointed if it wasn't 60 carts, but I'm expecting 100 plus carts. So that would be what I would expect to bring into the town. And if we can bring the juniors with those, a number of them will be juniors, and it would be not uncommon to have 20 or so carts in a junior field, and then there's 3 different grades of juniors. So potentially there's 60 juniors. Well, nearly always there's a mum and a dad and the child, if not 2 children. So, and the plan is, again, it'll be a Saturday event. One thing about karting is a wet or fine event. So, wet or fine, of course. So if it's wet, it'll still continue. We can't say wet with the tyres. It makes for more excitement. It does slow things down a little bit, but I can tell you very, very little. But it does also increase the potential for hazard, So the opportunity here too is for with the particular circuit, the majority of the town can still be open. And along the quay, it can be fenced off quite easily and have good spectator participation. So there's 100 ideas and are all floating around in the brain. So the same thing again, behind the old chambers and the dock building is there would be an ideal pit space. And we could use a lane through there for a pit shoot and a run off then at the end of the straight into that cul-de-sac would be quite good. When they finish a heat, they can go down there. So a little bit of thoughts going on that. There's a couple of little bumps and bits and pieces we may have to have a wee bit of a look at. But in general, the road's pretty reasonable. It'll be pretty tight, but there'll be quite a wee bit of setup involved. And so it's an idea. Anyone got any comments on the idea?
Let's go around the table. Councillor Davidson.
Just briefly again, the circuit down the quay and whereabouts.
Yep, so you'll travel down the quay and turn left on the Cyril Street, I think Cyril Street.
Cyril Street,
and then, so and then straight up Hamilton Street by the club.
Yeah.
There, right in front of Mile 10, Tanker Street, and then you got the little short on the right onto camp, on the camp, and then on the wharf. So a little bit east from there.
Yep.
If you want a better turn. The new shed on the corner from the fellow from the carving, the man makes the ornaments on the other corner.
Oh yeah, yeah.
There's a new shed. Yeah, like the
where the copper places.
Sorry?
Where the copper places.
Yeah, where the copper places. They require a little bit of padding, of course. The bays along the quay will require padding. The motorcycle street race do have some big sausages want to be able to move full of bottle bags as well now, which we move to employ along there, and the car sport wants to put a chicane down the Gibson Quay to slide it down. I'm sort of working on them to take those back out for the bigger cars, so the senior guys like myself and maybe a little bit of space. but at the end of the day, part of my problem is that whilst I'm standing up here doing this presentation now, even within our own club, I have to attend national conference that car sports regulations, a convener for the event. Safety officer, of course, the tech steward, etc. We've got about 7 or 8 officials they want us to have, which we have to accommodate and feed and water, look after them. And that's a cost and something that's on us, on the club.
How long would you expect the closure on the streets would be?
I would expect probably very similar to Greymouth, really, probably early hours in the morning till probably 6 at night, something like that, or 5, 6 at night, just depending. I would like to think that the carts can roll out rather rapidly, and we get a full day's program in with a lunch break.
And the other question is the expected crowd roughly.
I honestly, I wouldn't. That'd be fine, so I wouldn't have a clue. I genuinely wouldn't have a clue.
In Greymouth, what do they normally get? Like watching it live?
That's a good question. I don't know. 5,000.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, again, bearing in mind the first event, and it's whether or not we make an annual, whether or not we want to go forward, trying to make an annual event or biannual, etc., etc.
Sure.
The first 1 or 2 years, and all these sorts of events take a bit of getting off the ground.
Yeah. Sounds exciting.
One of the advantages we have is no road racing and road demonstrations in New Zealand, and certainly not in the South Island for quite some time.
Right. Thanks, Alan.
Peter.
I just quite like the concept. It's actually something new to give a go.
Yeah.
What have you said? Give a go.
Joanne, how do you feel about it?
Look, I think it's a great proposal. My 2 concerns are always around safety, but Alan obviously has got the experience to be able to deal with that. And the second one is around, the public or residents being displaced or not able to go about the usual business. But certainly the circuit reduces the impact of that because there's not too much goes on around there. So, before we confirmed, I'd like to know that, for example, DOC or whoever's affected by that road closure has been consulted.
TC.
No issues from my point of view. Obviously, if there's any
Excellent. We know what you mean.
No,
Joe, TWC would have possibly some thoughts and
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, as you've identified, it's the spectators which actually bring the economic benefit rather than the participants, which even the youth, their whole family usually come with them, which is a great economic benefit to the community. The other thing is have a look on the Development West Coast website. You'll find a regional events fund application form, which we've just put up there recently. That has 2 intakes, one in April, and I think off the top of my head, I wrote the guidelines, so I should know, October-ish. And there's the whole guidelines there, and also an application form if your event aligns to it. But yeah, good concept.
Do you like that? Eh?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's similar to the Greymouth street races. To me, it's how to optimise the event, and as Joanne said, it's not displacing the business owners, but actually being able to optimise business owners and how you, yeah, it's all around.
Yeah. I think the potential is quite strong. You're saying again, if we were hoping to form a partnership maybe with Whitehall Rotary, help with the setup, because again, if our club runs it and we want to take partner, and then there's always the thing of food stalls or little stalls, etc., that go along with all those types of events. So there's lots of. I said it's a very early start.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, I think it's a grand idea. Events are where it's at, so more of them. And of course, we've had motorsports here before, going back to that Thunder and Westland motorbikes, like 18, 20 years ago when roaring around the streets. So we've done it before, so I can't see any reason not to do it again. And great.
Councillor Hart, you can't shift it out to Quiverine.
I'm going to enter.
Oh, yeah?
I've got a car in the garage.
This is not Dawson car.
Did you declare an interest?
Oh yeah, I think it's a great idea, and if it brings economic benefit to Hokitika, that's great.
Yep. Councillor Martin.
Thanks so much for the concept. I'm wondering what we can actually do to make it a reality. Because obviously you've got all the ideas and the enthusiasm and knowledge. What support do you need to actually get it to a point where it can happen?
Well, again, because it's still a concept, but we have taken a couple of steps further today, and with Carsport, I suppose closer to time there'll be things, hopefully, through various forms of sponsorship from businesses, etc. as well. Like it may be that we get some way of assistance with accommodation for Carsport officials, and Carsport is very, very heavy on that. And we talked about safety before. I mean, they just won't let anything go unless it's to their way or no way. So I think realistically, coming closer to time will be promotion of the event. Promotion of the event, maybe more so on the public arena, because through the carding, I think we can probably handle it internally to make the event a success, so that we can then go forward and have it again, really. So I suppose it'll be maybe a little bit of financial, but just basically even the letter of support, etc., going forward for our organisation to make sure we get it done properly. So, first up, best dressed, and best presentation first time. So on a side issue with that, Carsport New Zealand and the Westland Car Club have a love-hate relationship, I suppose. The regulations that carry on have gone on in the last few years, and a lot of clubs have been quite a rebellion in the last few years. Our own club has had that. We've ended up in a court, for want of a better term, for breaching standards at a club day. And yet we have a healthy respect for Carsport, and Carsport does have a healthy respect for us. The fact that they're even considering this now at the highest level, and that is in part due to the fact that the national president, has had it pointed out by the stewards that have come to the street race, motorcycle street race demonstration, that how professional and how well we do it. Because their impression is that it's only on the coast we get away with it. And so I can let you know that there'll be none of that. I can tell you that for now, because if I say it happens that way with the club anyway. So
Yeah, just a question now. Did you think about going all the way up to the Sunset Point with the new roundabout up there? Because it would make it quite a feature. Right up to the top.
You mean along Epsom Quay?
Yeah, right up to the top and do a roundabout, the new roundabout up there.
I haven't driven up there to be fair, and would that mean then going up and back and around down the same road? Well, then you've got the barrier problem down the middle of cars going opposite directions. And I have raced street. I've done extensive street racing in the past, and when it was common, New Brighton, Southbridge, and various areas in Christchurch as well. And I can remember driving at New Brighton when it had 44 gallon drums full of water, and you could see the carts really get going in the opposite direction. I can tell you, it would be certainly frowned upon these days. So we had actually thought about going along to next one over to Real Street, is it, and coming onto the quay corner, but that particular corner is quite rough and quite dippy, and with the carts it would just be too messy really. So we sort of brought it back and get the distance down, which is also keeps it to a sprint, which is more after. So short and hard and fast, and keep them going through the day. The main emphasis for karting, I'll take the interrupt you, again, is to bring this event karting the way it should be, and put the emphasis on fun, because again, as a motorsport, and a governing body is so rigorous in inspection. I'll give you a wee side issue. If you're at a major event and you win a race, and the first three people are to take their engines along to checking, the check guy pulls it to bits in front of you and checks it as all legal. He gives it back to you on a box of bits, and you have to go and make it again from the next day. You want to race the next day. They are so, I'll use the word anal or tight in the thing, and I've already told the national steward, we don't want ticking. We're not interested. If someone wants to cheat, the only person that cheats themselves, we want to make it a fun day. We want to make it so they want to come back and keep the day rolling. So that's the biggest emphasis for us, is making it enjoyable for the karters as well.
So Ellen, what would you like to see come out of this meeting? Today, what's the next step?
Well, the next step for us, for me personally, really, I suppose, is support. I suppose even legal support doesn't really matter. We've got to go a little bit further down the road with car sport. So this is possibly a little bit premature, but it's not, because you haven't got. It's a wee bit like Mum says you can go if Dad says okay. Dad says okay if Mum says it's okay. You need both parties to come a little bit in the middle and get support from the council and the businesses, so that it's going to be okay. And then car sport it's okay as well. So you don't want to be going if you want to go say, well, this is the support we have. So when we finally do the presentation of the car sport, we know we've got the backing. So that's really what I would like to see. So it's a early day, but there's a lot of work.
Let's see that. Are there any other questions, councillors?
I just think that one of the key points is the affected parties, and it's really good if you get a clear, precise sort of picture of what you're presenting to those affected parties. You get those affected parties on board. I think she's a real goer.
And get in early.
Yes.
Yes, well, it's also, there's natural process, isn't there? You still got to believe your roads, right?
Yes.
Road pros and all the normal disclosure patterns that go along with it. We've had the same thing from car sport saying you've got to weld your manholes down, you've got to do bits and pieces down, all the other bits, and I said, well, that's just normal practice. They talk to you like you've never done it. And it is normal practice, and the same thing again with business. So that's why I took the liberty of talking to Brett initially. But I do know there's been some development going on in the area, so we do have to be mindful of that. And I do think this circuit does limit the impact on the businesses, and hopefully we'll bring people into town on the weekend.
Really correct.
Just a question, Alan, regarding the date. You've got it in January. There's quite a few activities already on in January. Driftwood and Sands and a few other things. Is that locked and loaded in January?
No, absolutely not. It's just that our national steward was looking at it purely from a karting angle only. Right. And in fact, there's not much happens. And later, more towards, I'm not too sure the school calendar, because I don't have a job at school, but more towards the end of the school holidays type thing. When does school go back?
Yeah, 9th of January.
9th of February.
Yeah,
Right.
end of January stuff.
last week of February.
Yeah, so around that time, because if we want to get, I suppose really, regardless of even, I shouldn't say regardless of other events, it's all important. It's important for the economic for the town. But if you want people to attend, you've got to have it at a time when they can attend as well. And I know that it shouldn't be all about the competitors, because without the competitors there isn't an event. So, I suppose there's nothing in concrete yet. As I said, it's still very much a concept. And once we get into the it's a possibility. Once we're into the probabilities, we can start narrowing down the finer points.
And the important part is, if you bring the children along, is school holidays.
Yes.
Yeah.
Alan, I will get in touch. We actually have an events calendar for the whole West Coast and interlinked to Canterbury and the surrounding areas. So to me, if you're going to run an event like this, it's to optimise where you can actually complement other events going around, and also having the time to yourself, so you're not competing against another event.
Absolutely.
We'll be able to help you with that.
Yeah, excellent.
That's awesome. Well, Ellen, look, really appreciate you coming along. It's a long way from the North Shore to here. The North Shore of Cobden, that is, Chris. And he's a very famous man over there. We'll definitely be in touch. I mean, thank you so much. Let's see if we can do it.
Well, thanks for the opportunity. And one question I expected was why I could take that and not bring it. No one asked.
We work together. We work together. We do the street racing.
No, I mean, like I said, we already have that event in Greymouth as well. And I know it's been held events years ago in Victoria as well. And I just think it's a wee bit better suited here for the event. So. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ellen. Thank you. Would someone like to move that the presentation from Ellen Giles of the Westland Kart Club be received?
I'll move.
Peter Cuff, over seconder. Joe Boone, those in favour?
Aye.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah. I didn't do that. Okay, a good point. Someone like to move that the action list be received. Thanks, Councillor. And Councillor Davidson, those in favour?
Aye.
Right, the next item on the agenda is Mike, who is unable to attend. So we'll wipe him out there. We'll go from there to the Provincial Growth Fund verbal update. It's not here. Okay, we'll move on from there. The next item on the agenda is item number 7, which is staff reports, and one of the it's an area that I asked to be placed on the agenda in relation to Fox Glacier and Franz Joseph, because I think it's time for a discussion and a look at what we as a committee can do in helping formulate a plan going forward for Fox and Franz. It's become clear to me that the future of Fox and Franz is going to be different when this is all over than what it is today. For those that have had a recent look at the glaciers, and particularly the Franz Joseph Glacier, it is it's not a pretty sight, and perhaps it's time to get together and put in place a group that looks at the forward position of perhaps rebranding Fox and Franz with the community down there. Maybe even, dare I say it, moving away from glacier country. Maybe focusing more carefully on the World Heritage status that it has. But it needs a discussion. It's an uncomfortable discussion because there will be people on all sorts of different sides of the discussion that have some very, very firm views. But we as a council have got to determine where we sit and how we can help on the way forward. So I'd like to open it up for discussion. I mean, there's some wise people around the table here. And start start with you, Councillor Martin. Throw you into the deep end.
Thank you, Your Worship. I was just reflecting on the wise comment. So thanks for placing this on the agenda because it's very topical, relevant, and important for our southwestern residents and ratepayers. I think what council can do is lead or be a facilitator for the discussion. And I'm not sure where we got to working with the communities for the southwestern based roles, but I think if we want to see paradigm shift, if you want to see significant change, you're going to have to resource that, because us sitting up here in our ivory tower in Okotuka isn't going to achieve that outcome. So it needs to be owned by the community down there, and that's potentially an avenue for us to support, would be a resource, whatever that resource looks like, to lead this show. I know we're doing a lot of work in the urban design space and planning for AFAs, etc., growth of friends, change of friends, but this is a different discussion. This is a discussion around what attracts people to that area in the future. Why would people want to live, work and play there? It's a wider discussion, and I think the council's probably previously been involved in, so I just put that out there as the start, without trying to without saying this is what I think friends should become, and I think it has to be resourced and done in a way that we can get really clear, direct, a direction that has clear milestones and a pathway forward. Because at the moment, I see a whole lot of uncoordinated attempts to achieve something that not everyone is agreed on. So
I think at the present time, we've got a whole lot of well-meaning groups and people, some hurting badly, and Fox and Friends, and a lot of them, looking to, what is the answer? The West Coast has been down this track a couple of times in my lifetime. The West Coast Accord was put together. There was a community, a revival group put together. It's happened twice in my group, and it's about attempting to plan, looking at what the natural advantages are, and saying, how could this look in 20 years? And it needs, someone has to start the discussion. I can tell you, generally, it's a very uncomfortable start.
So, sorry, I'm going to jump in here. We're doing that as part of the destination management planning for the whole region. So, although it may seem it's uncomfortable, every single district, town, within the West Coast will be having that discussion about where do you see your destination. Okotuka is no different to France, of what is the future of, as Councillor Martin said, work, live, play here, and it's exactly the same for the Glacier. So we are leading that development West Coast through that destination management process. To me, that's one aspect. What we need to look at is the here and now for the glaciers, and we actually need those townships to still be there for destination to manage, really. And that is what we're working through. I currently speak to the community on a daily basis, and it's probably taking about 80% of my time at the minute, which I will explain a little bit later on, but there is work being done at a community level from the Economic Development Agency and from the Regional Tourism Organisational stance, and the community is involved, not just Glacier Country, but the wider community.
Can I just, thanks, Joe. I hear what you're saying, and it's important work. I guess probably the bit I probably didn't articulate well enough is around, I think with Southwestern too, certainly in the 7-8 years I've been on council, a lot's been done to them. We've led a lot of being done to them discussions rather than Southwestern being part of, leading their own journey. And not saying what you're doing is that, but I think it's really important that in this space, we don't do a plan change 7 or those sorts of, we really need the community to be part of a discussion that they put forward something for the future.
Yeah.
And facilitate that. And that is part of the destination management discussion, but I just wouldn't want to see us, like as council, we could go, it's not our thing, we'll leave it to DWC, and you'll work within your parameters, but this is a bigger beast.
It is bigger, and I don't believe that we will be doing it to them. I believe that there is a lot of community engagement. One comment that you said was somebody in the community. Great advocate for that. Other areas have got that, and especially within these times, that is what's needed, and that has gone up as a recommendation. Yeah. But yes, they need to own it. They need to drive it. Otherwise, it's not going to go anywhere. All we're going to do is put the staffing and the facilitation and the overview to enable them to do that.
You're talking destination planning.
Pardon?
You're talking destination planning.
Destination planning, destination management, and also from an economic development perspective.
If you wanted to say make South Western one of the townships conservation centre of excellence, for example, really left field, it's kind of that paradigm shift, that discussion that needs to be led. And who was it that had that role a couple of years ago through the government, who was like given France and said, across agencies, you can work across stock, MSD, housing, and they kind of had a bit of mandate, a bit of mana to be able to kind of move some of those mountains that are historically
small for me.
Yeah, and did that achieve anything?
It was to lead a conversation around the Future Friends group and making sure that the tourism economy was still thriving. And more focus around the resilience package. They contracted David Brash to do the report, and that's pretty well where it ended.
So it's got all these aspects in it, but it's kind of like a directive to be able to go in and support the community and have some immediate, like right here, right now goals, some short-term, medium-term goals, and then more long-term goals.
What did you have some thoughts?
I think we've kind of discussed it anyway, but I just want to see collaboration between all groups, because there seems to be groups of all different pockets of people doing different things. But just that collaboration across to involve everyone that's involved, got interest down there. And I guess we'd be fully supportive of that as a council, but just that collaboration, I guess.
Well, I can tell from the body language that you have something to say as well.
Nothing profound, I'm afraid. I wish. The situation down there is pitiful. And we all know that. I think there is some collaboration that's happening. We've got that proposal that came from the result of a merging of thought between Glacier Country Tourism and another group down there. But it was so expansive that it kind of lost its way. I think it could have been distilled down a little bit more, tried to go everywhere. Anyway, the question that His Worship is raising, though, is the far bigger question, and it is an awkward one, and that is what's the future of Franz once we get out of this COVID nightmare, and once the world gets back to some sort of normality, and once tourists start returning. I don't think we're under any illusion that even then it's never going to be back to the scale that it was. and there has to be a recalibration of the whole tourism market there's going to be a lot of pain in doing that, because it's not going to be as big as it is and has been. And already we're seeing some casualties. Unfortunately, I think there's going to be more before we see any light at the end of the tunnel. The danger, of course, with this is not just the loss of business now, but the loss of that skilled workforce. Once that skilled workforce is gone, it's this was built up over generations. To get back to that level is going to be a mighty challenge. Let's face it, the draw card is the glaciers and the ice, and those iconic scenes of the glaciers and the ice. But of course, they're taken a long way from the reality. And the reality is that if you walk up the Glacier Valley, you can't go up the Fox anymore, but you're looking at walls of rock. You're not looking at the glacier, and my understanding is that Glacier Guidon in itself is on a precipice. There aren't that many years left where it'd be safe on the glacier. I think that's the reality of it, and it's going to take a real sea change to find a new way forward for friends. And I just don't know what the answer is, but I think there has to be an honest conversation. It is an uncomfortable one, as this worship says, but it has to be an honest conversation as well. Or else we're just going to go around in circles and we're going to continue on this nosedive and be no way out of it. I think the council does have a role. Obviously, the locals need to lead it, but the council has a role in working alongside Development West Coast, I guess, in trying to find a new way forward for friends. This idea of a centre of excellence for conservation is a very good idea, and it may well have merit. Alongside, of course, this whole scheme for predator-free southwestland, which is coming and it's yet to get legs, but it will, and it's going to be big in itself. And a centre of excellence for conservation alongside that gives a new focus. But I think if we just sit and wait and tap our fingers waiting for the borders to reopen and the plane loads to start returning, I think is forlorn. And I don't think there's any future in that. I think the planning needs to be far deeper. But I have no answers.
Should I do further to add before I move around?
No, I mean, to me there is collaboration. There is a lot of work being done. I think council have been involved in meetings. There's collaboration with both MD and MSD and other government departments at the minute, which Glacier Country are involved in. Yes, the future is uncertain at the minute. We're just trying to work out what that looks like.
Joanne? You have
not a great deal to add. It sounds as though Development West Coast is heading in the right direction in terms of having the liaison between the Glacier Country tourism and government officials. because we can't. I don't think council can determine what's got to happen down there. It's really got to be, there's got to be buy-in from the local business and residential communities. So, getting them together in some way. But council's obviously got to support it. But I think perhaps doing it through Development West Coast is the right thing to do, by the sounds of it.
Good. Couple of comments. One is I agree with Latham about it having to be community driven. I'm a bit more thing and go, it needs to actually be business driven. That's my background. But what actually happens is, and I've seen it before, it doesn't actually matter what you come up with. If the business will spend their money where they believe. All right. So if you come up with a whole thing and there's people involved in the community that aren't actually in the business, it might go in a different direction where business is going to spend the money. If business ain't going to spend the money, it ain't going to happen. So I'm going much more that if we're trying to save an area, it will be driven around the business and what business can actually do. There may be some other things that come in, like your conservation centre of excellence, but to me that's the business that will really add. And I think South Western's still got a lot to offer. It's got a branding issue more than what it's got to offer down in South Western. The number of helicopters that was there just before COVID would tell you that actually, because of what was happening with the glaciers, what people were doing had morphed significantly. And I haven't had anyone tell me about a bad experience flying up and landing on those glaciers and how they felt about that trip. So I'm probably not quite as pessimistic, but it's got a branding issue.
Councillor Davison.
Who decides that it's not a beautiful place, or it is a beautiful place for visitors to enjoy that experience? I personally think, it is a beautiful place, and I think you guys are on the right track, engaging people with the expertise to come up with a concept plan, and particularly engaging the people down there in the community and other people that are associated with it. That's an important thing. Yep.
Is there an action point that comes out of this discussion?
I think we need to lead in this space, and you've done a good job politically leading, but there's an operational element too. You can't do everything, and it's the on the ground driving that plan, working with business, working with DWC. It's all that has to happen. And if we just all sit back and say, well, the systems that are in place now will lead to something good, hopefully, I think that's very negligent.
Joe, can I just ask a question, Joe? Joe, any of the areas, Joe Burney, any of the areas being prioritised and saying, look, we really need this area here needs to be prioritised above the others and getting them done a bit ahead of the space?
There is a point later on which I'm happy to discuss, but not in this moment.
Just councillors, there is another session in confidential which discusses a bit more sensitive information around Franz Joseph and Fox. So I'd rather park it for that conversation rather than have that public.
Yeah.
So do you have a view of where this council sits in the future of Western District?
This council, you mean the Franz Joseph?
No, Western District, because we are a district and we rely on us, we rely on Franz, Fox.
Well, at the end of the day, we can't shy away from how much GDP that Franz and Fox used to deliver to this economy. That's half the reason we've got to, we can have discussions with both regional council and MBA around the future resilience of both the infrastructure down there to make sure that tourism value that came into Western wasn't lost. Obviously, I suppose resilience came in another package with regards to COVID, which we had pretty good control over. So we're still exploring the resilience package, and that's primarily through regional council more than anything else, getting that package across the line. But we need to support both those communities, as indicated. We did have a meeting prior to Christmas with the business representation from Friends, both Rob Jewell and Richard Benton sat with us, and the DWC did come up with a program going forward that involved seeking external support from government through via Stuart Nash primarily and Warren Gilbertson, and obviously as part of MB. So things have been done, and I think Joe's been taking most of the lead in this space for the benefit of Westland. That's where we're sitting right now. In terms of the CDO roles, we have 2 CDO roles. I'm not sure of the current situation in terms of vacancies, but I believe one has been filled. That turnover of those roles is quite high. And obviously with the turnover of residents down there, that continues to be high. We did talk with the communities about beefing up that role and adding, making them more of a full-time position during this period. Without cutting to the chase, they weren't willing to pay additional funding to support them. So we actually talked to MSD about getting some funding for that role. And they were quite keen to explore it as well, but never eventuated.
Perhaps from a suggestion point of view, we roll it onto the action list. Just an update on Franz and Fox. We assembled our collective thoughts on going forward. And can I suggest that it's a shared one with Joe and myself in terms of the outcomes? Yeah. So I'd like to move that the verbal update be received. Moved and seconded then. That's Martin. Those in favour?
Aye.
We'll go back to Provincial Growth Fund update. Welcome, Warren. It's been a while. Yeah. Warren, do you know everybody around the table?
Most people, I think. Yes, I think most people.
Look, welcome to the Capital. And it's in your hands.
So when I was asked to come over here in November, it was basically around what does PGF2 look like. So at that time, when I was talking to Megan, at that time I said, look, I'll probably have some news by the February meeting. The reality is, I still don't have any news in terms of what that looks like. So obviously the Minister Nash, for us, has been taking a lot of advice. He's asked for further information. We thought we might have some, I guess, some news in terms of what that, that sort of support for the regions looks like. But at this point, we don't. So I know it's a bit of a quick update, but unfortunately, there's nothing more I can tell you at this time.
And what about the PGF fund, the projects that are
okay? So that's a good point. So that's something I can talk about. So clearly, priority this year is all about delivery, and that's been drummed into us. It's all about visibility, diggers on the ground, all those shovel-ready projects which were defined as shovel-ready, actually being shovel-ready and delivered. So with a view that if there are projects that seem for one reason or another that can't be implemented, or there seems to be blockages there, well then you're going to have to have a pretty good reason in terms of why that money shouldn't be taken away from you.
And are there any projects in Westland that are causing you concern?
No, at this point there is no projects in Westland that are giving me concern at the moment. We have regular check-ins. There's monthly reporting that this council, as a contract holder, has to do. There's nothing there that is sort of causing any alarm bells for me.
An opportunity, councillors, to have a discussion with Warren. It's great that you're here. It's brilliant. So, Councillor Davidson, do you have any questions?
I just, I mean to say, is there other projects throughout the country that are in risk.
Yes, yeah. I mean, when you're talking about infrastructure projects, you know, in the process that occurred last year, obviously, you know, there's quite a quick process in terms of the application process. And so a number of shovel-ready projects, when they go through that type of application process, turn out to be, for one reason or another, not shovel-ready. So, you know, clearly there's going to be some projects that are around the country that are, you know, probably a little bit more difficult to implement than when they first applied for the money. So, you know, the question that arises out of that is, and you've probably seen projects that have been talked about in the paper, which for one reason or another, the applicant decided not to take up the funding. So what has happened to that funding in terms of going back to the pot? Again, that's the part of the process we're still yet to sort of get information on as well. So for instance, if you take some of your wall projects, and I think Western had a cluster of halls, I think it's about 10 or 11 wall projects that have been implemented. Other parts of the country have got projects whereby they've got a multiple number of halls, but for one reason or another, one hall, the council may decide that they no longer wish to proceed with that particular hall and want to reallocate that portion of funding to another hall project which wasn't part of an application, part of an initial application. So again, you know, pre-election week, we obviously had a process which, you know, was just put down in terms of taking stuff back up the line and getting sign off it. There's still yet to, you know, get information in terms of that process as well, but I understand it's a little pipeline. Thank you.
That's probably, I'm not even sure whether it's an update there. It's more about, for us, where are the PGF projects actually at in Westland? And it might be Simon has a better idea of.
Well, yeah, I mean, I was about to say, probably looking at the amount of the table there, because we probably sort of give you the detail much better than I can. I mean, I have talked to Louis Sparks, who's obviously the infrastructure manager here. So, and he's providing a lot of that information as well. But, I mean, at the moment we're getting monthly reporting, but one of the things I've just sort of talked about with Louis is that we catch up more on a sort of a face-to-face or, you know, an online basis in terms of the, you know, rather than sort of the jobs and the numbers, which is sort of more the monthly reporting, actually talking about some of the physical milestones and the activities that are actually underway. Those are some of the, you know, the more interesting sort of detail that I'm keen to sort of, you know, obviously understand, but also that's some of the information too that ministers are more interesting, because if they're visiting a region, they're keen to see something where something's happening.
Yeah, just to assure you, there's plenty happening.
There is, yeah.
And there's a few projects still yet to kick off. That doesn't mean they're not happening. There's a lot of planning in the flux right now, locking down pricing, etc., and contracts. So if you want a very, very brief, quick update, I could ask Louis to give you a 5-minute snapshot. Yes. Well, let's go around first to see if there's any discussion. Any questions that you'd like to ask? There was a very good update at the last council meeting on PGF, and I suggested Louis or someone emails it to all the members of the committee. It's very comprehensive.
Oh, Warren, welcome back. Different role.
Yes.
Hey, what's the issue? Why is the money not flowing? Why is there this perception that, you know, things aren't happening? It was meant to be shovel-ready projects. Yes, I appreciate that some probably weren't 100% shovel-ready, but when you've got diggers literally lined up and paperwork complete, what is the issue?
So we're talking, I don't think we're talking about Western, we're talking about sort of in general.
Oh, well, let's just talk theoretically in general, but focus on Western would be good.
Well, I mean, but is there a specific project you're talking about in Western? Think about in particular?
I'm not aware of any being started.
So perception that you probably, you know, you read in media is that, you know, the money's not flowing, well, because they're infrastructure projects, there's generally sort of a detailed design. I mean, I probably don't need to explain to you, but there's obviously part of that planning process, which means that a lot of money doesn't flow in that until, you know, the consents are in place, the detailed design, the QS is signed off. And then once that sort of project plan is in place, then it's just a matter of those milestones being ticked, in terms of the physical works, and the money starts to flow. This year in the West Coast, this is when we're going to see, this year and next year, this is when we're going to see the money flow, because a lot of the planning occurred last year, as you were well aware. Now you're actually seeing the physical works under completion. That's when the money starts to flow. That's when you see the people on the ground. And that's when you actually see the people employed in jobs.
Thank you. Any other questions? It's look, Warren, if you have anything else,
No. Look, as I said, look, as soon as I know, you'll know in terms of how things will roll out, or any sort of funding initiatives that supports regional investment. Will be on the phone to you quite quickly.
We appreciate the close contact you've got with our executive. Yeah. It certainly helps.
Yeah. Well, as I said, I have no issue in terms of projects that are occurring in Western in terms of implementation. Things may have been a little bit slower at the start, but that's comes back down to that planning phase. But certainly things have moved along, and things are certainly happening. And you'll be aware of it because you're actually seeing these things firsthand.
Thank you very much for that. Really appreciate it.
Okay. Right. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'd like to move that the further update from Warren Gilbertson from the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment be received. Those in favour? Aye. And Three Waters update is the next one off the Three Waters project verbal update with Louis and Chris. So join in.
That's right. He's going to leave me tonight.
Oh, he's great.
That's right, I'll leave that.
Now, to those of you who may not have met Chris before, Chris, could you just give them just a brief?
Yeah, so my name is Chris Purchase. I work for a company called Tonkin and Taylor, and I've been working alongside council on a few different infrastructure issues for a number of years now. Initially in the solid waste area, but over the last couple of years we've been talking a lot around the Three Waters reforms and implications of that. So just want to give you a bit of an update for some of the stuff that we're seeing in that process, and some work that we've been doing with our CEOs from the councils across the region as well. So presumably if I push a button, I've got a couple of slides that I want to show you and hopefully prompt me to say the right things. Louis got it coming. So I guess what I want to talk to you about is what's going on from government's perspective and trying to think about improving the way that Three Waters are managed. So when we talk about Three Waters, we're talking about water supply, the water that we drink, wastewater, stuff that we flush down the toilet or flush out of our sinks, and then also stormwater. So effectively urban management of urban water that falls onto roads and those sorts of things. The driver for the review process is very much what happened in Havelock North a number of years ago. We had a significant event, and actually there were a number of people. We had severe sickness, and in some cases there were a couple of deaths that were reasonably closely associated with that. There's also a reasonably significant amount of concern around what's going on with the discharge of some wastewater treatment processes. If you've heard much from things like PGF, you'll also be aware there's a lot of concern around historic underinvestment in maintaining wastewater networks and so on. There's some real challenges in actually funding that. So there's been quite a bit of work following Havelock North. One of the things that's come out of that is the establishment of a new water regulator, Tomasa Arawai. So they're really in forming stage at the moment, and they're taking regulation of Three Waters off public health units and to some degree off regional councils as well to try and get some coordination around the country. And that's got some flow-on implications when we start to look at new regulations that will be coming in, new legislation around both the supply of potable water and the management of wastewater in particular. So the implications of that are that standards are increasing, and the cost of actually delivering against those standards is going to be incredibly challenging for local authorities around the country, but particularly for local authorities in this part of the world where you've got a lot of geography, a lot of systems to manage, but not necessarily the ratepayer base to actually manage that. So one of the implications of that is that government's decided to step back and say, well, could we actually structure the way that we deliver through water services in a different way? So there's a number of discussions that have been going on around the country, and one of those has been the 3 local authorities here on the West Coast getting top and a table to go away and do some thinking about that. Key point from a central government perspective is they've got several things that they think are important when they're thinking around how you might structure. So one is around access to funding, because there's an awful lot of money to be spent. Another is around access to the right capacity to do the technical work, but also to manage that technical work, to the right number of people, but also the right capability for what can be quite technical work as well. So these 3 things together, if you talk to people from central government, need to all be working well together to deliver the improvements that are required. You'll probably be aware that there was a whole lot of money allocated to local authorities right around the country to invest in 3 waters over a 12-month period from the middle of this year. And what's not noted on that slide, but has been significant for the team here at Council and right across local authorities, is Department of Internal Affairs have been gathering a whole lot of detailed information to understand what's going on for 3 waters infrastructure right across the country. And they're starting to use that to understand what might the implications be of those local government organisations having to actually meet some of these requirements. So this is the way that the Department of Internal Affairs articulate what they're trying to achieve with this reform process. So it's very much about improving particularly drinking water quality, because of some of the downsides of getting it wrong, but also looking at the impacts on the environment from particularly wastewater and stormwater. You can read them, I won't read all of those for you there. But a key one that comes through consistently, grab myself a drink, is access to funding. As I say, there's a significant amount of money that needs to be spent. Probably a key message to pass through here is that where this is leading government to think is that there might be a need for some aggregation or certainly increased collaboration amongst local authorities to provide scale that gives you access to capability, access to capacity to deliver, and the ability to leverage additional funding, all of which they see as being absolutely fundamental. A really important underpinning of the whole process is that water it might be something that's important to everybody, but is particularly important to Māori. So the whole concept of te mana te wai, and I can't even begin to articulate that. This is underpinning the whole process, and I think that's something that's significantly different from the current way that things operate. Again, I won't read that material out for you. There's I guess the proverb down the bottom. And there's a really good illustration, actually. This is about I am water rather than water being a separate thing. And trying to integrate that into the way that we think about the way that we regulate water, the management of water, the taking of water, the discharge to water, and the way that we go about delivering services is absolutely fundamental. So, Te Mata Arawai, as I said, just being established, these are the things that they've been tasked with delivering. They've got a pretty big job, but fundamentally they're about consistency of standards delivered right across the country. I think it's fair to say that's been pretty variable around the country, and they've been given some pretty strong tools through the Water Services Bill, but also under the Resource Management Act. NES stands for National Environmental Standard, so that's about actually putting some consistent standards around what we can actually discharge after wastewater treatment right around the country, and also overflows from our systems. This is really hard to read at that scale, but this is the timeline that the Department of Internal Affairs have set out. There's a couple of key things that are probably worth noting there. They're currently working, the Water Services Bill is out for consultation, and there's some draft standards in there. But those longer lines through the middle there are all about how coming up with the right model for delivery of water services. And again, government's been pretty clear that they see water services being delivered by a relatively small number of large entities. So that means that their signalling is that West Coast would collaborate probably with top half of the South, maybe the whole South Island. I've seen one model that talks about 2 entities for the whole country. So basically Auckland to Taupo and then everything south. So there's a whole range of different things on the table. But again, the way that they are thinking about this is that it's driven by access to funding, the right capability and the right capacity to really deliver some of the improvements that are required. So this gives you, I guess, some aggregation models, just some maps. The other one that has been kicked around but seems to be getting a little bit quieter is the concept of regional groupings. But I think there's some concern from within central government about whether that actually gives you the scale that might be required. You'll be aware of Wellington Water, which happens to be where I'm based. They're not doing particularly well at the moment. They've got some real challenges with some of their infrastructure not really performing. So the other day I was looking out the window of my office and watching again, having to deal with a burst pipe right on one of the main roads through Wellington. So they've got some real challenges with historical infrastructure that just is not performing. Watercare is the other model that you've probably heard of. So they're a council controlled organisation owned by Auckland Council. They're very large and certainly would potentially be a starter for dealing with some of the northern aspects. But again, they've got some significant challenges in terms of their interaction with council and some of their delivery as well. So there's no such thing as a silver bullet. A number of regional groups have done some work looking at different options as well. So there's a lot of conversation going on at the moment, some reasonably clear signals from government, but not an end point yet. There's going to be some pretty clear directions on the middle of the series that we're hearing. So this is the Water Services Bill that is setting some of the standards. I'm not going to go into the detail of that, partly because I need to defer to some of my colleagues to give you the absolute fine detail, but also because there's a lot in there. But the key point about this is increasing or improving standards. It's great for our communities in terms of access to safe water and improving the environment that might be receiving some of our treated materials. But it does mean significant additional costs. And again, this isn't a readable graph, but if you look on the right-hand side there, I've circled Westland, and I've also circled Grey and Buller. This is talking about the additional cost or additional spend that might be required by local authorities to meet the standards that are on the way. So luckily not Chatham Islands, which is the one on the left-hand side that goes off the charts. And I need to double-check which one the other one is. I think it might have been somewhere like Wairoa. But there's a number of local authorities that have some significant challenges. I think Westland's sitting around 3.5 times what you're spending at the moment.
Yeah, you highlighted the wrong one.
Oh, haven't you?
You've got
I slipped over.
It's not quite Greek, but it's 3 points.
Yeah, so the key message, I mean, the numbers are debatable in terms of exactly what they are, but the key message is that as a community, you're staring down a lot of money to meet the requirements that will be imposed on you by the regime that's coming into play. And the solution that government is putting forward at the moment is that collaborating with other local authorities to deliver that seems to be the solution that they're keen on. So in some way, you're going to need to find a way to actually deliver on these requirements because they will become very, very much that the regulation of those will become much more active than it has been historically. So some interesting challenges coming. I just wanted to quickly flick through some of the issues that we identified through the discussion across the 3 local authorities here on the West Coast, and they're pretty consistent with the sort of things that have been flagged in other parts of the country as well. So access to funding is challenging, access to the right level of capability, both in terms of professional or design type services, but also contractors, and that's particularly true with the volume of work that's on the way. One of the issues that's significant here on the coast, but is also significant in a number of other parts of the country, is private suppliers that have historically kind of avoided active regulation but will be brought into the regulatory regime as that comes on stream. So that's going to be potentially important in that councils are likely to have a stronger role both in regulating and potentially supporting the delivery of those private suppliers, particularly potable water. Costs are going up. Contractors have got plenty of work on at the moment. We do have escalating issues associated with natural hazards, and you're probably more aware of that than most people. I mean, our communities are expecting different things. So again, all of those combine to increase cost, community expectations in general. And it's less clear exactly how this is going to work, but we would anticipate that there will be a stronger focus on the management of assets. So not only will you have to be upgrading your system to deliver on new requirements, but you might need to be spending more money to maintain those assets over a period of time. There's some pretty significant stuff to ponder on there as we think about what that might look like. So in our discussions, we identified these key objectives to look at the different options. Ideally, you would find a solution that delivers on all of those. I'm not convinced there is one. All of them make a whole lot of sense. You could argue about which one's more important than others, and we've just used them as a way of provoking discussion around the different options that might be on the table. And the reality is that the preferred option is going to very much depend on which of those objectives you end up deciding is more important, given that we haven't found anything that delivers on all of them. So engagement, getting your community engaged in what you're trying to do is probably going to be supported more actively by a local or a regional solution. Partnership with iwi is a challenge right across the board, and there'll be strengths and weaknesses whether you go local or to something that's more like a super regional type scenario. Sustainable funding is challenging when you've got small scale. Meeting performance standards is similar. And accessing technical expertise is likely to be easier if you've got scale on your side. Affordability is going to be a challenge just because there's a whole lot of work that needs to be done, sadly. And securing appropriate technical expertise is also going to be supported by having some decent scale. So there's no perfect option. It's around looking at different possibilities and what are the key drivers that you want. So in the discussions that we've had here on the West Coast, I guess where we've landed is actually it looks like there's a very strong view held within central government, which is around aggregation into a small number of large delivery organisations. So the opportunity is those proposals form in more detail within central government and actually to think really hard around how can we get the best possible outcome for the West Coast and whatever that entity looks like. So the next steps that we're talking about, we've got a discussion with mayors and chairs tomorrow to discuss this a little bit further, is really to engage with central government around the issues that are important for the West Coast, particularly around how do you, in the context of a large delivery organisation, maintain some sort of connection with the local community. How do you make sure that you're engaging with iwi, not only, say, at a South Island or a north of the South Island level, but also on a West Coast level in a constructive way. And there's certainly opportunity to connect with other local authorities around the South Island. So at the moment, Canterbury are doing some work in this area, as are Otago Southland. Nelson, Tasman and Marlborough have some structures in place already, but are certainly interested in ongoing conversations. So it's probably a bit of a whistle-stop tour about what's going on. Is there any questions, comments, thoughts?
I think the government should just take over water, pay any tax, and like any other department, it's just getting crazy.
There's certainly some huge challenges in terms of delivering effectively what our communities are asking for. So,
well, are they asking for it? So that's the thing. I'm pretty sure a lot of the Western communities are quite comfortable with the water they're drinking. It's a Wellington model being pushed on the rest of the country. Although I appreciate there are systems that aren't up to standard, but I think they realise when they look out the beehive with burst pipes and sewage running into the basin and stuff, that they have major issues. But that doesn't necessarily mean that everyone in the country agrees with the Wellington solution of fixing those issues.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think to me the important thing at the moment is actually actively engaging in that discussion and how do you have a consistent approach but with flexibility. And you would imagine there will be some flexibility that will come through as the details of the model work out. But the more that you feed in issues that are specific to this part of the world, the more that the government is able to actually try and reflect those in the solutions that are coming through. So I guess that's been the focus of the work we've done so far, is to articulate what the options might be or the issues might be for the West Coast, so we're in a good position to actually communicate that back into the internal affairs in particular as they do the detailed work.
Chris, with 81% of the water being talked about under Ngāi are the negotiations or the discussions with Ngāi are they fully on board, do you know?
I don't know the detail of those discussions, but that's a significant matter that needs to be worked through. Absolutely. And nationally, that is an issue. So, yeah, as soon as you take the management of water away from local authorities to some slightly removed entity, then there's some significant things to talk through.
You wouldn't want to have a referendum on it.
No, from a community thing, I think, amalgamate us into Canterbury, Otago, Nelson, any of those areas, and we've virtually got no say in terms of our size. It's a bit like amalgamating the West Coast Electric with Tasman, significantly reduced our ability to have our local MP listen to our views. And that would be absolutely the same.
Yeah.
No, nothing at this stage.
No, nothing further.
Agree with Peter.
There are significant challenges, and I think the opportunity now is to try and come up with some models that will address some of that representation fundamental issues.
They can't do it in government. It's kind of not going to happen.
Yeah.
So, would you see the model working very similar to, say, NZTA?
No, I don't think so. I don't think that's where they're headed at the moment. They're looking at Scottish Water is the poster child, and that's effectively a very, very large CCO with quite a bit of regulatory structure around it. So there would be a governance role for local government in terms of how it's delivered. Seems to be the model, but I think that's still being developed. And the challenge is, how do you, even from a Canterbury perspective, how do you sensibly understand what the issues are over here? So they're materially different. So that is the challenge. It's a little bit different from an MP type scenario where you can kind of deal with it maybe, but as soon as the way you manage water on the east coast versus the west coast it's a different game, isn't it? So I think some big things to work through. So I think you need to have a strong voice, and we've got some reasonably good evidence that underlies that now.
Just a point of note, councillors, the work that we've done with Tonkin and the other councils doesn't stack up with a West Coast model alone. Working actually adds costs to the way we deliver water services. So we're better to stand individually in this space.
Right. Any other questions here? No? Thank you, Chris. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Someone like to move that the verbal update on the three waters from Chris be proceed. Thanks, Peter. Councillor Davidson, thank you. Those in favour?
Aye.
And final part is the Western District 2020 economic profile. And Joe, the floor is all yours.
I'm going to keep this very quick.
Tell us the good news.
Do you want me to go now? So we had the Infometrics release, which was this year to March 2020. And what they showed was that the GDP on the West Coast was up 2% from the year earlier, which was outperforming New Zealand. However, that was before COVID. So there's only a little bit of the COVID information in there, and a lot has changed. We're still waiting for quite a bit of information to come through. The tourism sector, even prior to COVID, had been hit on the West Coast because of the Waikato Bridge washout, the Moto slip, and Mount Hercules. This actually saw that for year on year that the visitor spend had dropped from 522 million to 480 million. Despite this, the growth in the GDP was still 42 million. So, despite the 42 million drop, there was still a growth in the GDP. So therefore, the diverse economy is really, really important, and I think that's come up in previous discussions as well. We are looking at the report. Some of what Infometrics are saying is that our economy is focused to take about a $94 million hit. Just a small hit there. Because the future is uncertain with COVID, we're still working on various information. Not much work has been done in the past to attract the domestic market to the coast. We've always focused on the international market. The West Coast, particularly the glaciers, attracted 21% of international visitors to New Zealand, so that'll give you an indication about percentage. At the minute, we are looking at how to get into the domestic market and how to market to those, but unfortunately there's only a certain amount of domestic spend, and it isn't 21% of the international spend, so we are going to be down. Overall, from a regional perspective, tourism is 10.4% of the region's economy, which, as I say, 51% of that came from international. So we are going to hurt on that front. On a positive, house prices are up. So what you'll find in the Westland district, the Infometrics report again is out of date, but it says it's 7.5%, and just 0.5% behind the rest of New Zealand. So that is really good and is leading in part of the West Coast. So the wide West Coast region, it says it's 3.6. So we're doing really well on house prices. However, unemployment again is lower than the rest of New Zealand. Unfortunately, some of this is because people are moving away from the West Coast if they become unemployed, and that is again very evident in South Westland. A lot of work has been done in relation, as I said earlier, around destination management and being able to pivot that and trying to attract new investment into the West Coast region and to assist businesses in aligning themselves to the domestic market while also keeping the options open for the international market. Any questions?
Yeah, roughly what percentage have left South Westland, and the unemployed that have left South Westland?
Well over 50%. I can give you all of those figures in the next session.
Okay. Thank you.
Good. Are they draft?
Pardon?
Are they draft? These reports, yeah.
No, they're from Infometrics, so they'll.
Okay. The West Coast Region Quarterly Economic Monitor one actually says that our dairy payouts gone from 377 million to zero, and that we're going to be $13.7 million. No.
Sorry, I'm trying to.
13,730 be 13 billion lower than last year. It's just under the highlights for the West Coast region under the dairy, so it's obviously missed some data.
What page are we on?
It's got
So much.
I can take that up with Infometrics because they provide the reports.
Yep. So it was just in that total dairy payout section. It was page 8 of the West Coast Region Quarterly Economic Monitor. The Westland one's okay. It's the West Coast.
Yeah, I'll follow that up because 377 million.
Big holes in it.
Just a drop.
Joanne, do you have any questions?
No, nothing from me. I don't think there's any surprises particularly in there, and I suspect it might look less enthusiastic next time, given the timing of this. I don't know what we can do about it.
I agree. I mean, it's all about the timing, and getting up-to-date information is always an issue, and government are working on that at present, because it causes us, as somebody said today that I read, it's like trying to build a house with only 10% of the plans, and you've just got to guess the rest. So we've just got to react with the information we've got, and that unfortunately means with some situations we're not reacting as quickly as we could.
Thank you. I'd like to understand more about the unemployment figures and on top of what Infometrics has given here, to understand the where the increases come from, and how much of that has actually been transferred into the West Coast. I don't think something you can answer but I think it's an important question, because looking at the raw figures, one could assume that it's from COVID, there's all these people out of work, etc., etc. But we do know anecdotally, of course, that there are a lot of people that have been moved here. MSD are moving them across here, and my cousin is housing them in a motel in Greymouth. And so they're not coming here for jobs, they're transferring across here on the benefit. And I'd like to know, really, how many of the unemployed are being trucked in?
I cannot answer that. That is an MSD response.
No questions really, but yeah, given that the report's September, it is along. We're at 4 months out. Yeah. So we're looking back rather than looking forward.
Yeah, and unfortunately, that's the information which the majority, actually not the whole of New Zealand, has to work with.
Which is, yeah.
It's due to be updated soon, though.
It is, yeah.
Exactly. So it's hard. It's crystal ball gazing and this sort of stuff, but at least it's maybe providing a baseline. Sometimes it's optimistic, sometimes it's pessimistic in terms of its forecast, but I think it's the actions that we take once we understand the data, or not if the data isn't correct, but that actually makes the difference.
Yeah.
And Paul, I think that perception is widely held, particularly in Greymouth. There's been comment around different people being needed to be housed in different locations. So housing, if we look at things we can influence, we have a role to play in housing. It may not be social housing, it may be pensioner housing, but we definitely have a role in housing, and it's one of those levers we can pull as a council or as a CCO to actually see those graphs shift in a positive way. So we think about what's in our sphere of influence, although we're getting the big picture. That's something we can actually do.
I agree with the housing, and your CEO actually sits on the cross-sector housing forum, and there is a housing strategy for the West Coast region, which is currently in its final stages of consultation. So we've gone out to all the councils with that and the various aspects of the cross-sector forum, as well as the education. So there's lots of work happening from a cross-sector forum where the councils are involved, and I agree it's how we react which makes a difference.
Simon, do you have anything to do?
No, I don't enjoy it.
Look, Joe, thank you very much.
Thank
Appreciate it. And if we can get someone to resolve that the report on the Western District 2020 economic profile will generally be received. Thanks, Councillor Davidson. Councillor Hart, thank you. Those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Yep.
It's now our intention to move into public excluded. Would someone like to move that we move in?
Yep.
Councillor Martin, those in favour?
Aye.
The meeting will now be adjourned for 2 minutes while we disconnect from Zoom. And to those that have been watching, thank you very much. Beautiful day outside. Time to get the lawnmower going. Thanks, Chris.
Oh, is that an offer?